Well, good morning, everybody. Can you hear me all right? Thank you. We do have a few premium front row seats still available. I know everybody likes to sit in the back in one of these events. We want to welcome you to this forum. My name is Scott Rogers. I'm the Vice President, Governmental Affairs at the Eau Claire Area Chamber of Commerce. And our purpose today is recognizing the fact that we have tax levy referendums on the ballot for both the City of Eau Claire and the Eau Claire Area School District on the same election. And so we've appreciated both the school district and the city taking time to be with us today so that we can do sort of an apples-to-apples comparison of both referendums so our business people and others in the community can make a good decision about voting on November 8th. A few announcements before we get started. This forum is an event under the Chamber's Business Advocacy Initiative, and the organizations you see on the screen right now are those that support our business advocacy, so we appreciate them working with us on that. And we want to tell you about some other things coming up. We do have one non-election thing coming up, and that is actually this coming Thursday. That's here at the Pablo Center on October 20th. We have Eggs and Issues, the economic impact of tourism. And then when we do something at the other end of the day, we do eggs in the morning. In the afternoon, next Tuesday, we're doing Pints and Politics, and we're doing an event at the Chamber on what's at stake in the election. And then once the election is over, our next Eggs and Issues will be election analysis with Charles Franklin from the Marquette poll, and we'll be able to find out what happened. Just a reminder, Election Day is on Tuesday, November 8th. I'm guessing that most of you are like me, that you're a little bit tired of getting flyers in the mail right now. You're maybe tired of every time you turn on YouTube or your TV or listen to the radio, you're getting bombarded by short commercials, et cetera, on politics. And one of the things we try to do at the Chamber is give you reliable information to make good voting decisions, but we don't endorse candidates. And so what we try to do is reach out to them, learn more about them, give them a chance to say where they stand on business issues. And a couple things we have going on with legislative races happening is we do have our Good Government Council questionnaires where they answer questions about business issues. And we just completed doing video interviews with 10 of the legislative candidates, which we're in the process of getting available to all of you. So watch your emails, watch the Chamber website and our newsletters, and we'll tell you how to access those videos as well coming up. So a little bit about our forum today. We'll get right into that. We do have both the City of Eau Claire and the Eau Claire Area School District with us. What we're going to do is give them each an opportunity to give a presentation on what's going on with their referendums. I may be asking some clarifying questions on behalf of the Chamber after each of the presentations, and then we'll open it up for question and answer at the end. This is being recorded, and our experience with these is that usually more people watch the recording than attend in person. If you are watching the recording and you have questions that you don't get answered, we will mention at the end of the program where you can email with any questions, and we'll also be posting that so people can follow up on that. And I'm sure they'll both talk about the fact that they have websites at both the city and the county with more information about the referendum. If you're here in the audience and you do have a question you'd like to ask at the end, I'll just remind you to be thinking about that, what it might be. Make sure it's a question and something that they can answer. And I will have the microphone and I'll have you ask it at that time. So that's our format. We sort of by draw or by happenstance, we decided to have the city go first. So thanks for being with us today, and we'll go right to Terry Weld, our City Council President. He'll introduce what the city's going to talk about and the rest of your folks that you have with us today.
Great. Thank you, Scott.
All right.
Good morning. Everybody hear me okay? All right. My name is Terry Weld, President of the Eau Claire City Council, and we are greatly appreciative of this opportunity to present to you the Eau Claire City Protective Public Safety Referendum. I'm sorry. And I want to recognize our City Manager, Stephanie Hirsch, our Fire Chief, Chris Bell, and our Police Chief, Matt Rokas, for their diligence in working to identify solutions to ensure our city can continue to provide the protective and safety services we've all come to rely on as a community. Joining me this morning is Deputy City Manager Dave Solberg, City Council Vice President Emily Berge, Police Chief Chris Bell.
Fire chief.
I'm sorry.
He won't give me a gun.
We usually go in the other order, and so I'm all a little backed up here. But Fire Chief Chris Bell, and then Deputy Police Chief Chad Hoyard. Police Chief Rokas and City Manager Hirsch were not able to join us this morning, but again, send their regards and appreciate the panel members here joining us this morning. Our objective over the next 20 minutes is to provide you with all the information you need to make an informational decision and an educated decision on whether to vote in support or opposed to the upcoming referendum. Before we break it all down, I want to begin with a brief explanation of the challenges we are faced with. The City of Eau Claire has identified a sincere need to add additional public safety personnel to the fire department, police department, and 911 dispatch operations. The increase in calls for service, a growing population, and ensuring our staff's mental and physical well-being are the primary drivers in this request for increased funding to staff our fire, EMS, and police departments. As they stand today, the current funding and staffing levels are insufficient to meet the needs of our community without additional resources. To date, our public safety staff has done an amazing job of meeting the growing needs by working smarter, creating efficiencies, collaborating with stakeholders and community members, and prioritizing what types of service they can provide. Despite their work, the city does not have the funding ability, apart from a referendum, to remedy this situation any further. We are at a breaking point. I want to welcome Deputy City Manager Dave Solberg as he helps shed light on common questions regarding tax incremental districts, operational budgets versus capital budgets, and the impacts of capital bonding on an operating budget. Mr. Solberg.
Thank you, Terry. So throughout the public involvement process for the referendum, there seems to be a question of budgeting, and just trying to highlight and illustrate that the City of Eau Claire has two budgets. We have a capital budget, and we have an operating budget. And although they're related, they're different. There's different rules for it. Capital budget was just approved. That pays for the streets, buildings, anything that you have an asset for or a value for. And the capital budget is able to be put in the property tax levy for that. On the other side of the budgeting, we have the operating budget. And an operating budget is what pays for staff, it pays for routine maintenance, it pays for fuel, snow plowing. All of the human part of the city and the services that are provided come out of the operating budget. And that budget is limited by state levy limits. And adding public safety, our police and fire and EMS services, their funds come out of the operating budget, and that's why we're at a need for the referendum. We get questions about TID. Is TID something, our tax incremental districts and TIF, tax incremental financing, something that can be used to provide for police and fire services? And TIDs are created, and we have 9 active TIDs in the city currently. They're created to capture revenue from the property taxes. Then that goes back into capital expenses for those districts. They go to create the roads, the parks, the bridges. There's a but-for clause. So what TID financing does is it creates the stage so the development can go forward. And if it wasn't but for those TID funds, that development wouldn't be possible. So the question about applying TID funds for public service or public safety staff, it goes towards a different budget. It doesn't go towards the operating budget. And TIDs do come to an end. They end anywhere from as short as 10 years, and they can run out as long as 22 or 23 years. So it's not a finite, it's a finite pot of money that pays for the capital, and it's not appropriate for ongoing expenses with the operating budget. So with that, I'll hand the mic over to Council Vice President Emily Berge, where she can talk more about the decreasing revenue from the state of Wisconsin.
Thank you, Dave. Okay, it's a big microphone. Yes, welcome to everyone for taking your time to be here and people that are watching online too. In addition to my privilege of sitting on City Council, I also have the privilege of serving on the statewide board of the League of Wisconsin Municipalities. And I'm going to tell you that these conversations that we've had over this last month, where we're coming to your neighborhoods, we're here at the chamber, we're on the news, on Facebook. These conversations are happening all over the state. This is a statewide problem. And many communities have gone to referendum. They're going this year, and many more will be going to referendum next year because this is not sustainable what we're working with. And a large part of this problem, this tricky part of it, is the shared revenue, which is up on the screen here. So just a little history lesson, and some of you may know this, but in 1911, the residents of Eau Claire and Wisconsin voted via referendum to put on the state the state income tax. And actually, we were the first in the country to do so. So fun fact there. But so we voted by referendum to change the state constitution to apply this, I keep forgetting the income tax. And what this means and why they voted to do this is because of two things. One is that the purpose of this new tax would help take away the reliance on property tax. And the other reason is that they said the lion's share, 90% of this income tax would go back to local services to fund police and fire, because they know that it's not sustainable to do it on property tax only. And so that was part of the deal in 1911 when the residents and citizens of Wisconsin voted to put this tax on. That was the deal. Now, over the years, 10 years, it has gone down, this shared revenue. So kind of how this looks for the city of Eau Claire. In 1990, so 90% was voted in 1911, 90% of shared revenue, so our income tax that we paid to the state was supposed to come back to us in our local communities. In 1990, 40% of our city budget came from this shared revenue, so our income tax that we paid to the state that was supposed to come back. Now in 2021, so last year, 9.4% of our city budget was from the shared revenue. Again, these taxes that we pay to the state on our income that supposed to come back to us. Now, if you can remember 1990 Eau Claire, and that we've always been a great city, but we were a little smaller then, not as much great things downtown. Now compared to 2021 Eau Claire. And we've grown a lot, and we're vibrant, and we're doing amazing things, and yet this decrease from shared revenue has gone down 76%. So just something, that's just part of the statewide problem that we are feeling very strongly here in Eau Claire. So just wanted to put that in for the information for you, why we're asking for this. Now
Thank you.
I'll pass it on to, yes.
Thank you, Emily.
Yep.
Again, the need for our public safety services continues to rise both here and around the state. But current funding sources are stagnant, and existing staffing levels inhibit the ability to adequately respond to calls for service. As stated, our police and fire departments have used every creative means to maintain service without adding staffing, and the options available to function within existing budget limitations will undoubtedly compromise existing service to the community. And because of state-imposed levy limits, Eau Claire must now ask approval from taxpayers through a referendum to increase the tax levy to fund these services. And I want to welcome Fire Chief Bell and invite him to share with you the challenges of our firefighters and EMS and what they face each and every day. Chief Bell.
Good morning. Thank you for having us here this morning. With the fire department, over the last 10 years, we've seen an increase, as Councilmember Berge had mentioned, how our community has been growing approximately 5% in the last 10 years. It seems more than that, actually, but if they say it's 5, it's 5. With that, our staffing hasn't increased. We actually haven't increased staffing in 20 years. We've gone down. We've lost in the last 20 years We're about 2.5 positions lower than we were, back when Banbury was around, if anybody remembers when Banbury closed back in the early 90s. But our calls continue to grow. In the last 10 years, our calls have grown 25%. In the last 20 years, our calls have grown 50%. And we don't see that going down. We're at approximately 9,800 calls for 2021. We expect to be well over 10,000, probably around 10,400 for this year, 22. That just means more work for the existing staff that we have. We need to add staff to keep up with that growing demand. Where are we at in our slides? And so in order for us to maintain the response levels that are national standards and that what our community expects, we specifically need to add more staff on the south side. Our goal is to add staff at Station 6. Over the last, I'd say 6 months, we've been working on remodeling that station. This has been in the plan for 5 years, that we would remodel that station this year in anticipation of adding staffing. So we'll have that station capable of staffing 5 people. Right now, it only staffs 3 people. And what that is a combination station. So there's three firefighter paramedics at the station. So actually 2 of them are firefighter paramedics, 1 officer. And they have the ambulance and they have an engine. If an ambulance call comes in, they jump on the ambulance and they take off and the engine sits there empty. So if there's a fire response, they're not getting that fire engine. There's no one there. They're getting it from another station out in the community, which means a little bit longer response time. If a fire call, if they're in station and a fire call comes in, then they're taking the fire engine and then the ambulance sits idle. So there's no ambulance there. That means if they need an ambulance, they're getting one from somewhere on the north side of the city and it takes longer. That's occurring about 150 times per year. It keeps, or at least that's what it was in 21. It continues to grow. As we have more and more calls, we have more and more overlap where having a full complement station is important to keep those response times in line with the standards that we expect. So out of this referendum, should it come to fruition, would be adding 6 people to that station, meaning 2 people per day. So by increasing our staffing, it brings it up to 5 per day. And that allows us to staff both the ambulance and the engine, which improves response times. Now, even if you don't live on the south side, and Station 6 is down on Gulf Road, down by Red Robin, even if you don't live on the south side, it still affects your response times throughout the rest of the city. For example, if the ambulance at Station 6 is sitting idle because the engine's out of the station on an engine call, then they bring down Medic 5. Well, now that means if there's a call in Medic 5's area, Medic 5's not there because they're down in Station 6's area. So now you're gonna have to get Medic 9, which is up on the north side, over on the CVTC campus, up behind Menards. And that just takes a longer response time. The goal is to have both our engines and our ambulances equally spread out, for the average response time that comes in. The goal is to keep our engine response time within 3 to 5 minutes and our ambulance response time from 7 to 9. So anywhere in the city, at any time, you can have an engine there within 3 to 5 minutes. That's with your AED, it's a fire, it's an EMS call, whatever, that's our first response. Anywhere in the city, we can have an ambulance there within 7 to 8 minutes. That's with our ACLS, our advanced life support, all the things that go with that. If we look at our staffing comparative to other communities, we're lower than a lot of our comparables. We'll take La Crosse. We've always scratched our head at La Crosse, so if anybody from La Crosse watching, they have more staffing for fire, about 6 or 7 more, and they don't run EMS. They don't have an ambulance service. Same with Appleton. Appleton, I think the slide shows Appleton right at where we're at. Actually, they think recently there are a few people more. They've added some. They don't run EMS either. And so I say that they don't, with EMS brings in revenue. There is some revenue. It doesn't offset the cost of a service, but at the time, they don't have the staffing or the need to send ambulances out. We provide that service with the exact same staffing as those communities that provide only fire response. So with that, we also have overtime. I think you're going to hear the police department speak to the similar issues. We've had a lot of overtime over the last couple of years. COVID's just, that's every business, every community. We're just coming out from the shadow of COVID, I hope. And one of the things that we need to tackle is our overtime. This won't help it as much as it may for police department and how they do it, because we're actually increasing our minimum staffing. But the goal is that we also work on reducing our overtime hours to offset that. And so part of this global, between the referendum, if it comes to fruition, and everything else that we're gonna do, our goal is to reduce our overtime hours because that's a burden on the employees. It's a burden on how many days they have to work consecutively. It's a burden on every weekend and every holiday. It'd be nice for some people to actually have days off when it is their time to have a day off. And I think that's it for fire. Is there one more?
Thank you, Chief Bell.
Thank you.
I now want to again thank Chief Hoyard, and if you wish to share
Sure.
an overview of the police department. Thank
Sure.
you.
The Eau Claire Police Department has seen a major increase in calls for service in the last several years. We've responded to nearly 20,000 more calls in 2021 than we did in 2012. This is about a 67% increase in calls for service, but our staffing has remained stagnant. In addition, many of these calls are complex calls regarding domestic violence, alcohol and drug-related situations, weapon issues, child maltreatment, and acute mental health. Some of the things that we've had to do, and they're difficult decisions in the operating, is we've now had to rely on a lot more online reporting where we used to meet in person with police and community members. We've also had to stop certain services such as civil standbys, motor vehicle crashes that happen in parking lots, assisting with missing property. And all this in order to ensure we have time and resources to address priority calls. Next slide. On this slide, you can see that the Eau Claire Police Department has the lowest staffing levels per 1,000 people compared to peer cities. We're 1.43 officers below per 1,000. We also fall even shorter when we look at the state average. This impacts our capacity to serve the community, and it also affects the officers' mental health and well-being. Next slide. Over the last several years, we have made several adjustments trying to meet staffing requirements. At times, we have reassigned detectives to fill patrol shifts. The margins are razor thin between available staff and the on-duty hours that need to be filled. Because of this narrow margin, unforeseen circumstances or disruptions in schedules such as illness, injuries, family leave, and staffing vacancies have a direct effect on our ability to meet staffing standards. In addition, the inability to hire additional staffing is financially inefficient as it results in overtime pay for existing staff. In 2021, the department paid 3,740 hours in overtime for shift shortages. This is a 450% increase from 2018. Increasing the number of officers by 6 would enable the Eau Claire Police Department to augment its shift staffing to better meet peak command, while reducing overtime impacts and ensures off-duty officers are able to provide rest and recover from their shifts. Finally, the dispatch center is a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week operation who is responsible for answering emergency calls in the entire county and then notifying the appropriate emergency service provided to respond. In the last 4 years, the dispatch center has seen a 15% increase in emergency calls. Despite the growing call volume, current staffing levels require these dispatchers to also spend time on administrative tasks outside the scope of this role. The referendum funding would provide an additional civilian law enforcement associate who would be able to carry out some of these administrative tasks and allow the dispatchers to focus in on the calls that they receive in dealing with many of the mental health issues that come in through the comm center.
Thank you, Deputy Chief Hoyard. This is the referendum question that we'll read on the November 8th ballot. This is the technical language and structure required by state law, and how we spend the additional levy cannot be altered in any way. If the city residents were to pass the referendum, the tax levy in 2023 and each year moving forward would increase by $1.4 million to cover the cost of the additional 15 public safety personnel. This translates to a property tax increase of about $22.55 annually on a home assessed at an assessed value of $100,000. On a property valued at $200,000 would then see a tax increase of $45.10 a year, or $3.76 a month. This would allow the city to fund 15 additional public safety positions, including 6 firefighter paramedics, 6 police officers, 2 civilian community service officers, and 1 civilian law enforcement associate to support the 911 dispatch. If the referendum is rejected by a majority of the voters, the city will be faced with a difficult decision about how to address the growing need to provide for public safety services. A rejection of the referendum would have a negative impact on emergency service capacity. And then lastly, the referendum is available to voters either in person, voting early, or an absentee ballot. And we encourage all of you to go out to our website, on our city, the Eau Claire City website. There is a referendum page that will put you in touch with all the information that you see here, along with a lot of other supportive data, including FAQs and additional information regarding the referendum. And then also there is an email link that you can email to us directly with any additional questions that you have. We appreciate this opportunity again and look forward to answering your questions and helping you make the right decision for you and for your families.
So as I mentioned in our format, the chamber had a few questions that we want to ask and make sure get covered. I have a couple to ask them right now based on those feedback we've gotten. Then we'll go to the school district. We may do the same thing, and then we'll take questions from the audience when we've heard both presentations. So one of the things, just to clarify, so you've given the amount, presumably the amount of the tax levy each year, and as the assessed value goes up, it'll be a different amount. Since it's an operating referendum, is there a sunset on this? Will this go on in perpetuity, or will it end at some point?
There's no end to it.
Okay, so it would be a permanent addition so that may be a difference is what the school district says, and we'll get to that.
So if our levy was $50 million this year, next year it'll be $51,400,050. And each year, whatever our levy limit is, that additional money will be added.
So one of the things that we know is happening in Eau Claire is that we've had some success in development. Our population has grown some. We've had additional assessed value because of net new construction. And so one of the things we hear is that that's a positive on the tax levy. It's the one way. So could someone speak to that and how that's affected things, and what is the history of our tax levy when we take into account net new construction, and how is it looking now? Maybe I'll have you pass that other microphone to that one.
You know, the net new construction and what that does for our community is, you know, a great benefit. And we're fortunate that our city is successful. It is growing. People want to move here. People want to live here. People want to bring jobs here. And so with those new developments comes the additional revenue that it creates, both in our tax base and then the ability for us to raise that levy for whatever that amount is each year. And each year it's different. I don't think we have a number yet that we can speak for this 2023. Or I guess our new net construction for 2022, which would then go in effect later. But, you know, obviously we've seen our budget is out there now, and you can see what we're projecting to be the additional amount that will be added to the levy. And again, it's available to all of you on our website. But we've come to rely on that. There are many communities across the state that have no new development, that are not growing. And they realize these same challenges and still need to meet those needs. So.
Okay. And then another question that people are aware that the the city received several $million in federal funding from the American Rescue Plan Act. So could you relate to us how much that was and what impact, if any, does that have on the need for cities to go to referendum? Did it have any impact on that?
Sure. So the city did receive a little over $13 million in American Rescue Plan Act dollars. The first thing to point out is the ultimate goal of ARPA funds, as they're called, is to offset the negative economic consequences of the coronavirus pandemic, whether it be to a organization, a municipal organization, a county organization, or to groups that were disproportionately impacted. The first allocations of the ARPA that were brought before the City Council includes funding for a warming center, and it's a temporary function. It's 3 years. ARPA funds have a finite time span. They have to be spent within 4 years. So it's not something that we can increase our budget and plan on it for 4, 5, 6 years. So it's really meant to help groups that were disproportionately affected. And during the coronavirus pandemic, the homeless and the unhoused populations did increase, as you may have seen around town. And the first allocation for that is a warming center for the unhoused population during inclement weather and very cold winter weather, and then warm weather in the summer. In addition to that, there was allocations to the transfer center that is currently under construction to help with affordable housing that would go on top of the transit center to help provide that affordable housing that's so vastly needed for the community. There will be a second round of ARPA allocations that will go through a public process. So the remaining funds beyond what have been allocated already will be allocated at some point in the future, probably later this year or likely starting early next year with that. So, but the use of ARPA funds to fund the police and fire officers and public safety, if it were used for that, there would have to be another funding source found in 4 years when the ARPA funds expire. So then we would be facing the same question in 4 years, or we would have to lay off those officers that we found or that we hired. So ARPA's short, more capital-based, and a one-time funding as opposed to an ongoing allocation that the referendum would provide.
Okay. And one other finance or budget-related question. One of the things that the City Council considered but then withdrawn a few weeks ago was the proposed Niagara water project. Can anybody speak to how much revenue that would have given the city and how that might have affected the need for a tax levy referendum?
A lot of answers to that question. Obviously it was a challenging decision for us as a community. Mistakes were made, I think, from the very beginning, and we've worked our way through it now to where we are today, which, as was already stated, Niagara has formally withdrawn, any future interest in their bottling plant here in Eau Claire. To answer the question, what we'd be looking at, an additional increase in our levy for I guess it would be 2024. For 2024, it would be an additional $280,000 on a $50 million investment.
Okay. And then just one other question. You gave some interesting charts versus peer cities for public safety. Do we have a sense of, versus our other peer cities, how we look in terms of the tax levy that they have?
We do. City of Eau Claire, on a $150,000 home, their estimated tax bill would be $1,234.50 in the City of Eau Claire. In Oshkosh, $1,741. La Crosse, $1,624. Wausau, $1,530. Appleton, $1,422. And Green Bay, $1,470. So of the 7 or 8 comparable sized municipalities, we are the second lowest.
Okay. And if you have other questions for the city, hold on to them. When we're done with the school district, we'll give a chance for some other questions that you have too. So we appreciate your presentation, and we'll come back to you for questions in a few minutes. Thanks. All right, we're going to move on to the Eau Claire Area School District now. And who gets the clicker? Mike. All right. And actually, I'm going to introduce Mike. So we are going to hear about the school district's plans for referendum now. We'll have some Q&A afterwards, and I'm going to turn it over to Superintendent Mike Johnson, who will tell us who we're going to hear from today. Mike.
Thank you, Scott, and to the Chamber, as well as to the City of Eau Claire. Really appreciate your presentation and everything as well, the audience members here in person and virtually. I'd like to introduce our Executive Director of Business Services, Abby Johnson, as well as our School Board President, Dr. Tim Nordin. Very excited to be able to share with you about our referendum as well. Differing from the cities, this is largely a capital question. The first part of that is statutory language, except for the $98.6 million over 20 years. Later in our presentation, we're going to speak quite a bit about each one of those 4 major projects at 4 schools, as well as the seven additional schools, like I said, later on in the presentation, and what that means to our school community. First of all, some facts. Although many of you have lived here for quite some time, or your children have gone to school here, maybe you have gone to school here. We have 22 brick and mortar buildings. We have 20 brick and mortar schools, 1 virtual school, as well as the District Service Center on the near north side, and the administration building at 500 Main. We're serving over 11,000 students in 2022-23. This is as of October 13th at 2:03 a.m. when we ran the report. We look at these quite often, obviously. Looking back at last year's, the enrollment is stable right now. We took a tremendous hit, as did many districts during COVID, from 2019 to 2020. But we're coming back. We're stable. As many of you know, with 20 schools, there aren't always nice, easy patches of enrollment that go nicely across the community. However, I think Eau Claire does a very good job with having very few boundary changes in the past few years impacting our students. We're the 8th largest district in Wisconsin, and we're ranked 287th out of 421 school districts for spending in 2021 DPI data. While this is a capital referendum, this does impact our operations, obviously. Not all school districts in Wisconsin are funded equally. Districts are limited in the amount of revenue for operations provided through state aid and through property taxes. Since 1993, there has been a cap, and those caps were put in place to control increases in property taxes and in state aid. Very early in the 90s, I was a college student here, and I remember when Uniroyal had closed. And in 1993, when those caps were put on, the district had not levied to the maximum at that time because this community was hurting. That likely contributed to our district spending lower than the state average. So when you look at 1993, almost 30 years ago, Eau Claire was a fiscally conservative district at that time when the caps were implemented, and unfortunately we have experienced that negative effect, our students and our staff and our families, for the past 30 years. So here's some comparables with that revenue limit per student. I included some regional districts, even though they're smaller, but I also included the state average, as well as La Crosse that we tend to, whether it's operations, capital, you name it, but we like to use university communities. But for example, while we're in close proximity to Altoona geographically, you can see that, as well as the state funding as well. Just looking at the state average for 2021, we're below the state average by over $500 per student. That adds up to $5.5 million in our district. La Crosse receives approximately $1,500 per student more. And we looked regionally too with Augusta. That impacts our operations. While it's a capital referendum, again, a piece of our operations does impact the capital. And to speak a bit more about that, I'm going to pass this on to Abby Johnson.
Thanks, Mike. So as he said, it's important to talk about our operating expenses, but this is really a capital referendum. So When we talk about our operating expenses, we like to share with our community and with our stakeholders how we spend a dollar in the Eau Claire School District. So all of this information is based upon our 21-22 budget, because our 22-23 budget will be adopted next week. So 75 cents of every dollar is spent on salary and benefits. We are a people organization, and if you think about that, we need educators to help our students become better community members, and so that's where we spend the bulk of our money. 17 cents of each of those dollars is spent on contracted services. So you are probably very aware we contract out for our busing service with student transit, as well as our substitutes with EduStaff. A penny of the dollar is spent on mandated private school costs. So we have to provide transportation to our private schools. We provide for vouchers for private schools, as well as Title I and special ed services as well. 4 cents of every dollar is spent on supplies. Think about consumables, textbooks and workbooks and things that our students are touching every day. We spend about 2 cents on insurance and debt costs and a penny on our facility improvement. That ties into our referendum. We spend about $1.8 million a year on capital improvements. With 22 buildings, that doesn't go very far. It's like 75 cents of all of the square footage. Well, in today's day and age in construction, you can't do very much with $1.8 million. And so that's what we wanted to share about that, because this is critical to our capital improvement and why we're going to capital referendum now. Some of the questions that we received from the chamber and we were asked to cover were about a few operating things before we transitioned into capital. But the district does still have OPEB benefits in place for retirees that were hired prior to 2004, 2008, 2010, or 2012. The board has made changes in those timeframes, but we still have about a $78 million liability that spreads for the next 20 years. The board has tackled it and has had many conversations. The latest changes were made in 2018, and those changes started in the July of 2021, so about a year ago. This last spring, the board was faced with a tough decision as far as wage increases and benefit increases. We knew our health insurance was going up, and wages and CPI, which is very largely how school districts determine what their wages are going to be without going to referendum, was at an all-time high. The CPI for contracts starting July 1st was 4.7%. When you're a heavy people industry, that was about $5 million for the school district. We had an opportunity that our health insurance was out for bid at that point in time, and so part of the discussion that we asked to come forward with proposals was looking at going from a broad network, which included all providers, to a narrow network. In addition, the board considered separating out our active employees and our retirees. And so by doing that and looking at those changes, that provided a cost savings of almost $2 million to the school district. So the board did move forward with that, and so we haven't seen, because that just went into effect July 1st of 2022, we haven't seen those cost savings yet, but we anticipate there will be some cost savings in the future on that. Another question that we were asked was about the ARPA and ESSER funds. So the school district has received 3 rounds of ESSER funds. The first round was about $1.5 million, the second round was about $5.6 million, and the third round is about $12.8 million. Each of those had specific dates that we could spend them by. Year 1, ESSER 1 was done September 30th of 2022. ESSER 2 is ending September 23, and ESSER 3 is ending September 24. Again, these items and this money can be used for operational costs, not so much for capital improvements. And even if it was allowed for capital improvements, it's not offsetting what the intent was when those funds were received. So you can see we listed 45, 30, and 25% breakdown. That 45%, based upon what our community told us, was you need to spend that on learning loss. How can we support our students coming off of the pandemic? 30% was also indicated to be spent on mental health and other needs that our students have experienced, again, coming out of the pandemic. So we have the opportunity to use a little bit of these funds for boilers or HVACs or things like that, but it's a very small percentage of that. It's not, again, going to impact the capital needs that the school district has. When we talk about funding for school districts, it's kind of a circle, and the district has their piece and provided with the state aid that we get based upon our student enrollment, and there's a lot of factors that go into that. There's a piece from the state that comes with, the district has the local property taxes. And then that's governed by the laws that Mike talked about that came into effect in 1993. We have to look to our community to exceed those revenue caps and to be able to do some of the things that we need to do. And so one of the things that we talk about is that we're not funded equally, and it's very much dependent upon how many students you have, what your spending was previous years, and all of this complicated formula that we look for each year. And that's a whole different topic I could educate you on another day. But we've been very fortunate in our community that our community has supported us. We had a successful capital referendum in 2011. If you were here in the community, you saw improvements to DeLong Middle School, Putnam Heights Elementary, Robbins Elementary, and Sherman's Elementary. The debt that was issued to complete those projects will be paid off in 2031. When the school board and administration worked on that referendum, there was intentional purpose for Putnam Heights, Robin, and Sherman to provide growth. We knew that in our district boundaries, we had capacity for growth or potential growth in the Putnam Heights area, the southwest side of the city, the southeast side of the city, and the west side of the city. Not so much on the north side because there's a lot of industry on the north side of Eau Claire, as well as we butt right up next to Chippewa in the Chippewa School District. So you'll see as I start talking about the buildings that that planning is beneficial in this proposed referendum because we are just able to add classroom space where we need it to an elementary school. In 2016, our community was also supportive of an operational referendum. We addressed about $25 million in deferred maintenance costs, and we touched almost all of our 20 buildings at that point in time. There was an operational component as well in that, and so that was helpful, again, to support those ongoing needs that we have for our students. Again, we issued debt, and that debt will be paid off in 2031, the same year as the capital debt from the 2011 referendum was paid off, or will be paid off as well. And now I'm going to turn it over to Tim.
So that brings us to this referendum and future referenda. As Abby mentioned, we do receive a large component of our funding from the state. But each year, or each biennium, I guess, we have major questions about how much will funding be increased. The previous biennium, we had a fairly large increase, and in this current biennium, we have $0 increase. In 2008, 2009, school funding was tied to inflation and was automatically increased each year with inflation. That ended in that 08, 09 and went to only legislative increase. Since the 09-10 school year, not a single year has increases to public education kept up with inflation. If we had had that, we would have over $3,000 per student more in our budget for our district. That is $35 million in just this year alone that we would have increased. That is an effective 26% total funding decrease for public education since 2009, 2010. As Mike mentioned earlier, we are still feeling the impacts from what I believe were compassionate and wise decisions in the early 90s to make sure that in a community that was hurting with businesses closing, we did not over levy and ask too much of our community at that time. But with the funding formula going in, Eau Claire is locked at that low level. And even as we've succeeded, as our community has thrived in the past decade, we cannot exceed those low levels that were set, with the exception of asking via referendum. We continue to have that negative impact, as I said today, on our education funding. And until we have a legislature and governor of any party that agrees to redesign the funding formula for education, the only way that we have in order to ensure that our schools are in build for our future, I guess, that is our slogan this year. The only way that we have to do that is to ask our community for those additional funds. Mike mentioned earlier, we have 22 schools and buildings in Eau Claire. There you can see the breakdown of our 14 elementary and early learning, our 6 secondary schools, and our 2 additional buildings. And the average age of our buildings is almost 60 years old. Knowing that we have all of these buildings that we needed to, the school board asked to have a facility study done in the fall and winter of this past year. We had outside consultants come in, go through every single school, and identify all of the needs of our maintenance in our buildings. You can see there that about $5 million in high priority, that is needs that are critical in the next 1 to 2 years for the district. 87 million and change in medium, that is a 3 to 5 year need. And then an additional 35.5 million in low priority, that is in the 6 to 10 year. Altogether, this makes nearly $128 million in maintenance needs for our buildings over the next 10 years. Right below that, you can see it broken down by elementary, secondary, and again, our 2 other buildings. So the school board then has to decide, we have all of these needs, we must go to referendum for capital. 3 primary reasons. 1, to address the aging infrastructure. We have a responsibility as a community to keep our buildings in good condition. These are public goods and assets. We need to invest in them, much as we do our own homes. We need to make sure that we continue to have those. In addition, learning has evolved over the past average 60 years, as you might expect, and we know that we need new and innovative spaces for small groups to participate in learning, to make sure that our class sizes remain reasonable. Abby will talk about that, especially at Putnam and North. And at South, making sure that they actually see natural light during the day in 6th grade. And finally, that reinvestment in buildings continues to pay off in our community as our community grows and thrives. Thriving schools move forward with thriving communities, drawing people to this area who want to have their kids in our schools, live in our community, and build our businesses. That said, we do need to be, and I know that the city has also intentionally crafted theirs to make sure that they have found a level of support in terms of the tax burden on our community. We wanted to be the same way. We wanted to make sure that our community said we can support this amount. Here you can see the chart of our survey that we participated in with the city. This is specific to the school district on how much can you support. In the end, we chose the $80 on the median home value of $200,000, which had significant community support, 57.7%. We wanted to be sensitive to the fact that though we believe that education is necessary for investment, all of us are pitching in. I'm sure each of you is thinking of your own home when the city puts up their number, when we put our number and saying, my house is worth this, my business is worth that, how much will that cost me? We wanted to make sure that we were sensitive as we move forward to the needs of our community. So knowing that we were aiming for an $80 on a median value $200,000 home, the question is, what can we fit into that? And I'll turn it back to Abby to start talking about the specifics involved in the referendum.
So that was a lot of discussion between the referendum committee, which is a few board members, and our facility team, as well as the school board as well. And one of the things that the school board told us was that they wanted to touch as many buildings as possible and places where our community members go, or people come to visit our community. So when we were having that conversation, we thought a lot about, do people come to our community to see elementary schools, or do they come to see the high schools? And the consensus was that people come to our community to see the high schools. When we visit other communities, many times you're going to high schools. Plus, the bulk of our students will attend North Memorial High School at some point. So you'll see there's a big portion of this referendum considered and kind of structured around Memorial and North based upon those items. So you can see that the $98.6 million includes 4 large projects, which I'll go into detail on, and then 7 small projects of some high priority needs. When Tim was talking about what needs to be done in the next 1 to 5 years, some of those medium and high priority things will be addressed, and that's another way that we can touch more buildings in the referendum, and that's where we came through to the 98.6. So the first school that's included is Putnam Heights Elementary, and as I said before, Putnam Heights was touched in the 2011 referendum. That included a lot of deferred maintenance and some of those small group instruction spaces that is very common in educational spaces today. So Putnam Heights, the estimated cost is $6.9 million, and that's to add additional classroom space. The school district has a committee called the Demographic Trends and Facility Committee that looks at our population and where is our students at. It looks at what percentage is our building operating at, and we know that we want our buildings to operate at 80 to 85% capacity. That's good for maintenance, it's good for education, and so that's kind of our target of where we feel good when our schools are operating in those ranges. Putnam Heights for the last 2 years has been operating about 87%. What that means is that if we can hold 400 students there, we're operating at about 360 students there. Starting to get small, we might not have as much space being used for small group instruction. And so the proposed addition in this referendum is to add classroom space because the population of Putnam Heights is going up. When we look to Memorial High School, that price tag is about $19.7 million. Again, as I said before, we know that our high schools are places that other people come to see. We also know that our community uses our high schools. So several of the items included in Memorial High School are specifically for our community members. When we talk about the auditorium remodel, that is a place that the district has a lot of community interest in. We use it for instruction, we use it for co-curriculars, think about music, think about theater, but that's a place that our community uses. Think about dance recitals and concerts. It's a very busy place in the spring. The auditorium hasn't been remodeled since the early 90s. So if you think about lighting and technology and all of the things that you need to make things successful, that is a big part of the upgrade there. In addition, Memorial does not have enough space if we were to have a closed campus and want to feed all of our students on campus. So the Demographic Trends and Facility Committee said, hey, this is a need that's identified because if you were to say we're going to close campus, we don't have the space to fit all of our students there. So there is a proposed cafeteria and commons remodel in addition. Now somebody might say, why would you put money into a cafeteria addition just to serve lunch? Well, it's not true. We use it for study halls, we use it for small group instruction, or different things as well. So that would be a space that would be utilized throughout the course of the day by our students that attend Memorial High School. In addition, you can see it here, but there's some yellow diagonal lines. We have about a $3 million roof project that needs to be taken care of in this referendum as well. Roofs are very expensive, and we try to keep all of our roofs in the district under warranty. That way then if we incur a problem, we have a warranty and we don't have a big operating expense that we're not prepared to handle. The final piece for Memorial, and you'll see this at North as well, is synthetic turf. We are the only school district in the Big Rivers Conference that does not have synthetic turf on site. Many of you know we go to compete at Carson Park, which is a great opportunity for our kids, but there's more opportunities if it's on site for co-curriculars and not just football. Soccer can use it, band can use it, Phi-Ed can use it, so it creates another additional space for our students to use as well. Now, one of the decisions, the tough decision that the board had to make to get to that 98.6 is this is just the turf. It is not a grandstand, it is not bleachers. That added more money and it put it outside of our range that our community would support. When we look at North High School, that price tag is about $20.9 million. Now the price tag is similar to Memorial, but North has different needs. North's population their population has grown, and that facility is operating at 100% capacity. So if you lived in this community in the last 5 years, you know there was a boundary change between North and Memorial. The question I get all the time is, why not just undo the boundary change? That's cheaper than a referendum. It's cheaper than adding on to a building. But there was a lot more reasons than physical space to have that boundary change. The enrollment population difference between North and Memorial was about 400 students, and it had been that way since North was built in the 70s or the 60s. And so the kids that attended North High School didn't have the same opportunities for classes. We had classes that were running 3 and 4 times a day at Memorial, and they wouldn't run at North High School because we didn't have the students that were interested in taking those classes. So that was one of the big drivers in that boundary change, and that was a big discussion because we wanted to provide the same access and the same opportunity for our students. We're here. We are able to do that, and it's very exciting from our standpoint. But we knew we would have a facility component. Once that boundary change happened, we thought it would be a couple of years down the road, and it came sooner than what we thought. So it's really a good problem to have, and it's exciting for our students because those opportunities are there, and that boundary change was successful with the goals of that. So you can see that there is a classroom addition, which will give more space, and it brings the facilities to mirror one another. That will bring North's capacity to about 1,900, and Memorial's capacity is 1,900 students as well. Again, similar to Memorial, when you have more kids, you need more space in the cafeteria. And the location of the cafeteria will impact some classrooms, and so with all of the shuffling and things that will be done, it was proposed to move the weight room and add an entrance into the doghouse. That entrance would be for athletics as far as co-curriculars as well, because if you're familiar with North, you can go right into the choir area and the band area from the outside as well. Then the last piece, again, like I said, for North, is that synthetic turf is proposed there as well. South Middle School is our largest project in this referendum, and the estimated price tag is $42.7 million. And, oops, did I go too far?
Sorry.
I guess I did. Thank you.
I got you.
You got me. Thank you. So again, if you lived in this community in 2011, DeLong got a major overhaul. South Middle School was kind of built as a mirror image of DeLong, but it was built 10 years later. So we're 11 years beyond that referendum. And even in 2016, the board had talked about looking at South Middle School and doing the upgrades needed. The price tag in 2016 to do South was about $27 million, and again, pushed us outside of that community support that we would have. So you delay it, you have a pandemic in there, unfortunately costs go up. So basically, as Tim talked about, we talk about learning environments and how critical learning environments are for our students. South Middle School, the 6th grade wing is built into the back of the hill. The students don't see light the whole day during the whole school day. And so that is an important piece of a learning environment because, you know, that natural light does impact all of our mental and our well-being. There is a couple of other things related to South, and really basically that space is all going to be touched. We need to create the small group instruction space and the breakout space, much like DeLong had in 2011. So that is the largest project in this referendum. When we talk about how much money is it going to cost, again, this is a capital referendum, and so we're going to issue debt. If this referendum is successful, much like you buy a house or you need to do a housing project, you borrow money, that's exactly what the school district will do. We will issue debt and bonds in the amount of $98.6 million, and then we will levy for that and we'll pay that debt off over the next 20 years. Based upon our community survey, our community told us they would support $40 a year on a $100,000 home. That's $3.33 a month. The average price in Eau Claire of a home, or the average value, is $200,000, and so that's where that $80 a year comes from, about $6.67 a month. If your home happens to be valued at $300,000, that's $120 a year or $10 a month. We emphasize that because we know that we're asking our community to support us. And sometimes people plan their budgets in terms of a month instead of in terms of a year. So that's why we break it down per month and share that, because that is a very important information for our voters to be educated on what will the impact be. So going back to the question, again, 98.6 would be the amount of the debt that we would issue. And then another piece, and you can see this in the blue, is that question seems really long. And we did spell out all of the buildings that would be touched because we know that even though we're trying our best to get all the information out there, there might be people that show up at the polls on election day and they have no idea that the school district has a question on the ballot. And so the board was intentional when they were looking at versions of questions. They wanted to list out all the schools that would be touched because maybe they have a connection to the school. Maybe they had a grandchild that went there, maybe their kids went there. And so again, that was a big important part when we were talking about what should the question look like. We want to be transparent and we want our community to know we're touching 11 of our buildings with this referendum. Then another question that we get is, what's going to happen if the referendum passes? Well, if the referendum passes, our first step will be to develop a team to finalize the construction plans. Right now, we kind of have the 50,000-foot view to estimate what are the costs and what are the options, but we really need a team to figure out, here's what would work best for each building. That team would be included of the principal, teachers, and staff in the building, as well as our building services team to kind of finalize that. Then the architects and engineers would create the bid documents, and the bidding process would occur. We work with Market & Johnson as a construction manager, and then they will actually put all of the bids out for us. This impacts our local economy because many times we have local contractors that are able to do the work for us. Then we would issue the bonds so we can pay for those projects. And we know that there's an IRS rule with the bonds that are being issued. We have to complete the work in 3 years. If we don't, we have to pay an IRS penalty. And if any of you know me, I don't like to pay the IRS money. So we will do everything we can to make sure that those contracts and that construction is done within the first 3 years. South is probably the biggest project and will take 2 to 2.5 years by the time that gets started. And we would anticipate some small projects being done in summer of '23, but the bulk of them probably not until summer of '24. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to Mike.
We'll go quickly. I get the positive one here. What happens if the referendum fails? Obviously, more information would follow as the board would discuss the issue with administration, but it delays everything else. And as you learned, by not doing South back in 2016, that increased by $16 million. There could be boundary changes. We talked to you a little bit about North High, and we talked about Putnam. There could be boundary changes possible prior to 2024. Higher than average class sizes. North is at its functional capacity right now. We're just continuing to place students in there. That October 13th count, I believe, the capacity was 1,700. We're at 1,705. Possible alternative scheduling options possible for North High. General maintenance, we continue to defer that. In those projects we talked about too, with South, talk about natural light. Rust on the interior walls isn't real positive either. Neither is a dehumidifier going throughout the school day in the spring for those 6th grade kids. Terrible learning environment. But ultimately, those operational funds, let's say that roof goes at Memorial, we got to find that $3 million somewhere, and that'll come out of operational funds, obviously. We've had our, this is our website where we've placed information for probably about the past 4.5 weeks now. Every time we have question and answer sessions, we have informational presentations. We're probably on our 52nd, 51st. You know, we add to those FAQs. Any types of questions you have or information you'd like, please feel free to go to that website. We have a video for each one of our major projects as well as for the overall. Those are on our website as well. And we've already had 2 major community-wide informational sessions, and our last one is at Memorial High this Thursday. And I know Scott was talking to us about this a little bit before. The email, if you have questions, you don't get to it today, please feel free to email us. We try to get back to people as soon as possible with 2022 referendum at ecasd.us. Thanks so much again for this opportunity, and Scott, I'll kick it back to you.
Great. Thanks, Mike. I have a couple quick questions for you, and then we'll open it up to the audience if you have any questions for us here as well. We're looking at a referendum for capital, and we're hearing that it's related to needs for classroom space, et cetera, not plus keeping things up to date. So among the things we know in general about Eau Claire is that our population has been growing. We're one of the faster growing communities in the state. We also hear about smaller families and smaller high school classes coming out statewide. So as we look at it, making a significant investment in facilities, has the demographics committee or can anybody speak to the longer term expectations for student populations? What does that look like? Are we going to build, you know, a question would come, are we going to build buildings, but then in 10 years, are we going to have empty space? What does that look like?
What I can say is that right now, I think prior to my arrival, I think the applied APL, the lab out of Madison to do the the student population and the growth summary. What we're seeing right now, we've got a very large 9th grade class. The nice thing is when we look at the data is that we do pick students up throughout the way. With our 4K students, it's very difficult because mainly you've got families from other communities who are coming in. You know, we look at pre-K to pre-K year to year. It's kind of different because you've got people from other communities that are utilizing that service, that opportunity, that don't always come to kindergarten as well. But obviously because of COVID, you know, that really from 2019 to 2020 had a significant decrease. But like I said, we've bounced back from that, and it's stable right now and just gaining kind of like last year, where we picked up probably more than 100 students throughout the course of the year. We have to make amendments to our DPI count. Again, we're looking at specific pieces of the community, the Putnam Heights area, the North High area, where we're looking at enrollment pretty much every week.
I think in addition, I want to add that prior to COVID, Meadowview was a area that we had been watching, and they had been operating kind of above that 85%. And 5 years ago, I would have said we need to do something with Meadowview because that population is growing. Now with COVID, that has gone down. But the Demographic Trends and Facility Committee pays attention to what's going on, and they're actually talking with, they're paying attention to what the city does. There's a potential big development in the Meadowview boundary. And so, again, it would be not a good decision if we didn't have the house, if we added on and then we didn't have the children to come in. And so by adding on to Putnam Heights too, that gives us some flexibility. If there are new students coming, you can, again, we don't like to do boundary changes, but you can do a temporary boundary change and have a plan to see what does that come to, and does that come to fruition, and is it a short-term need or is it a long-term need as well?
All right, and before we go to other questions, I want to go back and just clarify the amounts that are being asked for by both entities. So I'm going to come back to the city in a moment. So it would be on that $200,000 property value or $100,000, what is the amount that's being asked in the referendum? I'd also like to know, if you can deliver that today, what is the current levy from your entity without that? And what does it add to it? So, or we can follow up with that with everyone. So, and really specifically for the school district, because you have 2 past referendums still in effect. And if I understood those right, those will be on until 2031, is that correct?
That is correct.
So how much are those 2 that are in effect? How much is this one? And what is the total tax levy that the school district has?
Okay. I can tell you the total tax levy for the school district is just over 60 million. And that combines, our operating levy, our capital levy, and our community service fund levy.
And per 100,000, what is that then?
For the mill rate is expected to be, I haven't finalized the budget. The preliminary budget adoption was 630.
That's what I,
-ish.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, $6.30. So this would add 40 cents onto that and bring it to $6.70 per $1,000 of equalized value.
Okay, and then how much comes off in 2031?
That one I can't
Okay,
answer
maybe we
off
can
the top of
follow
my
up on
head.
that?
Yeah, I will.
And then this one will be 10 years? Is
This
that
one
right?
will be 20 years.
20 years, I'm sorry.
20.
I
Yep.
misspoke.
So it'd drop off in 2042, 43 school year.
Okay, and then back to the city, and then if anybody has any questions, we'll go to those. So what is you showed it in your slide, but it was quite a few minutes ago. So this tax levy will add how much per 100,000? And then can anybody say what the tax levy is now for the city total?
So looking at $100,000, $22.55 per $100,000 assessed value home would be added to each property
Okay.
owner. I just have the $150,000 value when it comes to what the current taxation would be, or the current taxes would be. So $1,234.50 is what you would pay
And that's-
based on $150,000,
Okay.
roughly $100 a month.
2/3 of that would be the,
And
okay,
then $33.82 would be the increase on a $150,000 home, or $2.81 per month.
okay. All right, those are the questions that we had as some things that we had already gotten feedback from chamber members. So if anybody has any questions in the audience, we'd be able to take them now. If you have a question, please keep it very concise and give them ask a question, and we'll see if we can get an answer. Does anybody? Yeah, and I'll bring the mic to you.
Hello, this is for the city, and I saw the slide said 450% increase for mental health, substance abuse, and alcohol abuse in police calls. What is the plan to actually get at the root cause problem to reduce those with this referendum increase, so we're just not being reactive and continuing to increase, not getting to root cause problems?
So we actually had 20,000 more cases in 2021. So the 450%, that was the overtime for shortages. So I just want to correct that. So that was the thing. So, but we have a 67% increase in calls for service, right, in 2021 compared to 10 years ago. And you're right, a lot of these calls are mental health cases. And we've done some proactive things now with the staffing that we have. We have what's called a hot team that we just put together 2 months ago. And we're out there, we have a couple officers that are in plain clothes. We're out there with DHS, Department of Human Services, and we have Western Dairyland who are partnering with us, and we're actually going out to these individuals in the community and trying to bring services to them and give them a warm handoff. Because what we're finding is, prior to that, we were getting multiple calls per day with some of these individuals. And it was creating these, some of them, we had contact 9 times in one day. And so we can't sustain that. And when we're doing that, we're not able to respond to the other things that are happening in the city. So one big thing is the hot team that we have going right now. We just can't sustain that every day. I just don't have enough personnel to do that with that. The other thing that we do is we are always looking at different proactive things that we can do to reduce our calls for service. But some things we just have to go to. And we use our crime analyst to try to look at different areas within the city of when certain things are happening. And then we'll focus our efforts on that so that we're not just blanketly policing a certain area. We attend the neighborhood associations and listen to the community members, find out what's going on. But we are so thin right now that when something happens or something big happens, we just have to pull everybody in, and we don't have enough resources without pulling a lot of people in on overtime. Does that help? Okay. Yep.
All right, anyone else have a question? Yes.
Okay, thank you for this. Much like the school district kind of put up some ideas about what would happen if the referendums failed, the city's side was more like there will be negative impacts. Can you expand upon that a little bit? If there's been any talks about if this does fail, what those negative impacts might look like for the city?
Yeah, I guess I can start out. We will continue, you call 911, we're going to show up. It could be 5 minutes, could be 6 minutes, could be 7 minutes. It just depends on the amount of calls in the day. Just the other day, and we've been seeing this quite often, we're seeing 50 calls a day for EMS, EMS and fire. The lion's share of our calls, about 75%, 75 to 80% of them are, actually 85% are EMS calls. Doesn't mean that's the percentage of our work during the day. That's just a percentage of our emergency calls. It'll be just longer response times. There'll be more ambulances out more often in what we call stacking of calls. You're going to have, a lot of times, we'll have all of our primary ambulances. We have 4 primary ambulances, and one of those being that combination company. We have the capacity to take engines out of service and staff additional ambulances, what we have our reserve ambulances. So if we get to that 5th, 6th, and 7th need for an ambulance, we bring an engine offline, that crew jumps over onto the ambulance, and they go out. We've had that occur quite often. We see that quite frequently on weekends, busy summer weekends. You're going to see a decrease in your fire emergency response because of that. And you'll also see additional response times. And along with when we have the reserve ambulances, excuse me, we don't always have those staffed with paramedics. We're not required to. It just depends on what the staffing composition is on the engine that day. So it'll just be longer response times and a reduction in the service. And our desire is that we don't do that.
If I could just add, each year it's a challenge for us. Each year we get requests from our departments for additional staff and providing additional services, additional equipment, and so on. And each year we just haven't been able to fund any of those requests in any department for additional staffing due to levy limits and shared revenues. But looking ahead and answering your question, it may come down to that we will still find a way to fund these requests for our police and our fire, but it may be reducing other services in our community to supplement that additional cost to us. So.
I'll bring the mic to you.
The way I understand for the city, it's basically operational expenses to hire personnel. I'm just curious, what happens if you are unable to hire or you're short in being able to hire individuals? Are you legally restricted insofar as being able to spend that money for other things, or is it tied particularly to salary increases for new people?
I'll answer and I'll let them add to the challenges of hiring right now. But, you know, for us, we are obligated to follow the question that was put forward to the voters. And so that money will only be spent once those additional positions have been added. But I can let Chief Hoyard or Chief Bell speak to the challenges in meeting those requests.
I think there's challenges almost everywhere out there with trying to find enough people to come in and work. We have increased our recruiting to doing 3 processes a year. We are dedicated to get as many officers as we're allowed to have. The challenge that comes with law enforcement is that once you do a background on an officer, a potential officer, by the time that you get them the schooling that they need and you get them the training that they get, it is almost a year from the time that they start the background process to the point where they actually hit the road and are working for us. So the challenge that comes to us is that if we get some anticipated or not anticipated leaves, it becomes challenging on hiring. But we are being proactive. We right now we have, I think we're 2 or 3 short, but we have a hiring process. We're doing backgrounds. We just hired 7 that have just come out of the academy and they're out on the street this week learning. And in 2 months, 2 or 3 months, they'll be out and being on the street on their own. So that does become a challenge with the profession, but we're not going to lower our standards either. We cannot lower our standards, but we'll work harder to find these individuals. If we have to go out of state to find people, we'll do whatever we can.
I think just to tie into that real quickly for fire, we are having difficulty. A lot of communities are in the exact same position we are, not just regionally, nationwide. A reduction in trained staff, trained paramedics, that's a core component to our service. There just aren't as many paramedics graduating from the programs right now. COVID was a part of that. A lot of the programs shut down, lower student enrollment. We now have seen higher student enrollment right now, but we won't see the benefit or the fruition of those students entering the program for another 1 to 2 years. Someone asked a question about COVID money. So what we have done is we are now hiring firefighter EMT basics. And so they don't have the paramedic training level yet. But with the ARPA money, we've slated $100,000. Council has slated $100,000 of that ARPA money to train our new hires to become paramedics because we need to continue providing that service. So we'll hire some we'll bring some new hires in that are paramedics. They're far and few between right now, and every fire department's scrambling. Chippewa Falls is doing a $2,500 signing bonus right now for medics. So we have to start looking at how we're going to compete with that. But what we're going to do is hire good qualified candidates. Oftentimes they're already on other career departments as firefighter basics, and we'll train them up to become paramedics.
Okay, any other questions? I might ask a follow-up question just to those because workforce shortages are hard for everybody in every industry right now. So I think both of you said you have open positions right now with your current staffing levels, but you're planning to add staff through the referendum, and you're somewhat confident you'll be able to do that. Naturally, some of that is turnover. So what do you see as the challenges in getting people to hire into this, and what is it pretty much natural turnover as people are retiring, or what do you see with people leaving?
From the Eau Claire Police Department, our turnover is retirements for majority of them. We had a lot of retirements in the last couple years, so it's been challenging to try to fill them. We're going to see in the next year, there's going to be a few more retirements, but then we kind of have a break for a little while. This has been a challenging time, but we also have people that decide that this isn't the career for them. And if they don't want to be a police officer, we don't want them to stay here and not do the job that they need to do and be there every day. So we understand that. I think we will continue to have challenges with the number of people that want to be police officers. When I went through 27 years ago, there were 500 people applying for a position for one position. Now we have 30 to 40 for 6 or 7 positions. It's a challenge, so we need to really work on our recruiting and try to find individuals that want to do this job.
Yeah, I mean, I could just say ditto, and that's what we've seen over the last few years is just a reduction. I had, when I was applying here, well over 300 applicants that went through the process. Now we're down to 15 to 20. I mean, part of that's on ourselves because we put the paramedic requirement as a condition of employment, to which we just changed that. What we've been doing in the last 2 to 5 years is getting into our middle schools and our high schools sooner to advocate this profession. The schools have been working with us. We have a program where we run our dive team into all the school. We use their pools for training, and at the same time, we give water safety presentations. And we hope that spurs that encouragement to say, hey, this might be a profession for the young boys and girls that may look at this as their career. We have a very good relationship with CVTC. I know that law enforcement does also, and we work closely with them to hopefully direct students towards their program. But we also do what we call our internships, and we let those students do internships with the fire department to meet their hours for accreditation or for their program. So those are the things that we're doing. We just have to keep doing more of it.
All right, we're at the end of our scheduled time. Were there any last questions? If not, any last words? Anybody wanted to make a comment that we didn't get a chance to get? All right, we appreciate, let's thank the school district and city for being with us today. This is recorded. Thank you for being with us, and be sure to exercise your right to vote on November 8th. Thanks.